Hello, and welcome to this Economist Ocean Innovation Insight Hour. I'm Hal Hodson, I'm our Asia Technology correspondent, and I've written quite a bit about oceans over the years. And we're really here to discuss one of the most important economic arenas on the planet, a place where humans have plied their trade and supplied themselves with food for hundreds, thousands of years. And the ocean, it covers 70% of the surface of the planet, and it is responsible, the OECD estimates, or rather is going to be, for $3 trillion of economic activity by 2030. And I'm joined today by some fantastic panelists to discuss this. And because this is about innovation and technology, the way I like to think about it is that machines are helping humans to do what Jacques Cousteau called civilizing the seas. And while civilization might, bring to mind lots of humans and maybe cities and humans doing things to support themselves, I think in the case of the oceans, it's going to be more mechanized and more technology based than civilization on land has been. And to kick us off, we are going to jump over to Don Scott, who is the Chief Technology Officer of the Mayflower Autonomous Ship, and he is joining us from Toronto. Hello there, Don.
Hi, Al. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too. Thank you very much for joining us. Don, can you please just tell us a little bit about what the Mayflower Autonomous Ship actually is?
So the Mayflower Autonomous Ship is, by its name, it's an autonomous ship. It was originally conceived to celebrate the 400th anniversary of the crossing of the original Mayflower. But we didn't want to just build a recreation of that ship. We wanted to build a ship for the future, one that spoke towards the next 400 years, a research project basically to look at ocean science, to promote ocean science, and to promote the future of marine autonomy. So in the spring, we'll be sailing across the Atlantic Ocean with a completely autonomous ship, so completely unmanned. And what we've had to do is develop a lot of technology in order to make that happen.
And the very basic questions to start us off here. Will there be humans on this ship or no humans whatsoever?
No, it's completely unmanned. And that's really the crux of the matter. That's what makes this difficult. So the ship is going to be in a very dynamic, hostile environment, the North Atlantic, and it's going to be having to understand its environment, have what we'll call situational awareness, and make decisions on how it needs to get from one location to the next.
I see. Okay. And the first question that popped into my head when I was learning about Mayflower was, is this legal, or have you had to do anything particular to make this legal? I mean, it's a big vessel, right? It's not like a tiny little drone or anything. Are there any wrinkles around driving a big thing without any people on it across the Atlantic?
Well, it's not that big. It's not like a large ocean container ship.
Okay.
So it falls within the domain of a research vessel. It's 15 meters long. So it has at least it's not this massive container ship, like I said, that's going to be trying to cross the Atlantic. So it is of a significant enough size, though, that we do need to adhere to common practices of navigation, and that's one of the key elements of the design is its ability to safely navigate in this environment, like following coal regs, the IMO coal regs requirements, and make make some very difficult decisions in a challenging environment, and knowing what to do when it comes across another ship.
Gotcha. So essentially, as long as you were able to say that the ship will be able to follow the rules of the sea, then you're okay to do it fully autonomously.
Yeah, so we're working very actively. This is a completely new domain for a lot of the
Mm.
regulatory boards. So we're working very actively with all the different organizations on what are the rules and regulations for an autonomous ship. This is, like I said, it's a completely new area for them. And for us, the key element is trust, is engendering the trust that's needed for these ships not just this ship, this is the first of its kind, but for future ships in order to work at sea. So, I mean, without this trust, the ships are never going to leave port.
How did you end up working on autonomous ships? What's the backstory here behind yourself and behind Mayflower?
Well, do you want to hear how I got into ocean science in general, or just Mayflower? Because I've been working in
Well,
ocean
I mean,
science my whole career. So,
well, the time being limited, maybe not the entire
okay.
career story, but what is it that led you and presumably your colleagues to deciding that this was an interesting venture and to pursuing it?
Yeah, so we have a long history. My business partner, and he's actually a good friend of mine, we've been working together for about 20 years in ocean science and ocean initiatives. And through those years, we've built up this core capability of software. And we sort of saw that there really was not a lot of actual effort and work done in true marine autonomy. There's a lot of remote control systems, but true marine autonomy. And this corpus of software that we had, we've now pushed towards artificial intelligence-based marine autonomy capabilities. And right when we were starting that was when the Mayflower project sort of kicked off, was conceived. So we've been using that as a forcing function to push innovations and technological advances in the world of autonomous marine autonomy systems.
How, I mean, so you guys are gonna, all things going to plan, steer this ship across the Atlantic in the spring. But I have certainly heard, varying reports of autonomous shipping, and especially for shorter distances, of that sort of being planned in the relatively near future. Explain to us the kind of timeline that you are expecting autonomy to arrive within shipping on.
Yeah, there's some very optimistic timelines out there for sure. I think what's probably more realistic is a staged intervention. I don't like to really use the term artificial intelligence. We really like the term augmented intelligence, where these types of systems are introduced into manned bridged operations in an advisory capacity. I see that as the real first step in this capability. The idea is you have a system on board that uses this technology that we're developing for Mayflower to work autonomously, but it's put on a bridge system to share we call it sharing the cognitive burden, basically making it easier for the crew to do what they do best, which is to make common sense decisions about ship navigation and have one of these systems there as in an advisory role. I see that happening very quickly. In fact, we're ready to do that now. And then where we go from there, who knows?
That's very interesting. I have not yet made it onto any kind of cargo ship, despite it being a long-running ambition. I think I was born a bit too late for that smuggling myself onto passages thing. But my understanding is that they're quite automated already in various ways, and that a huge cargo ship might only have a crew of, I don't know, 10, 20 people max. I guess my question is, what is the difference between what you are proposing and the kinds of navigation systems that already exist on big container ships, or maybe what you're proposing is in a different sort of vertical of shipping that doesn't have the same degree of automation? Can you pick that apart for me?
Sure. I mean, ships are incredibly sophisticated systems now. This idea of the lone captain steering his ship is something from the past. But that said, it is still the captain and crew that are making decisions, critical decisions in terms of navigation and based on ship interactions. They're receiving an awful lot of information from a lot of sensors. And I think what we're trying to do, what these types of systems is, it will get their heads out of these radar systems and sensors and get them back out, looking out the windows. And like I said, making like the things that AI can't do is like we're a long way from general AI where we're making common sense decisions about situations. But what it's very good at doing is identifying navigation hazards and identifying concerns that need to be brought to the attention of the human crew. And
Gotcha. Okay.
this is really just the first step towards you could have like smaller container type ships in specific areas working in known spaces as well. But that's like I said, I think that's a fairly optimistic sort of aspirational aspect of this.
Okay. Now, one of the important themes in today's webinar is the changing roles that people who work on the ocean, around the ocean, are going to have as a set of technologies arrive in various places. How do you foresee, or maybe a different way of asking this question, what sort of roles do you expect to appear around the kinds of autonomous systems you were trying to build on?
Yeah, so sort of staying in my lane here, and specifically in like ocean engineering and marine autonomy systems, I think the skills definitely going to need math and physics capabilities. I think the industry needs to embrace the idea that AI and machine learning is coming, and it is going to transform the industry. And I think if you accept that and embrace it and see how it can improve your abilities, you're in for a great future in this area. I think. Sorry, go ahead, Hal.
Well, so what I was going to ask is, where do you think that these new kinds of jobs, perhaps slightly more technologically enabled jobs, will be? Because it seems to me if the goal is to automate a lot of stuff that happens on the ocean, these jobs are quite likely to be on land in control centers, or writing the software, or maybe even downstream in areas that have been enabled and new jobs created because of lowered costs or whatnot.
Yeah, I mean that'd be a shame. I mean that's one of the reasons why I got into ocean engineering, was to get out on the water. Right. I think that's what attracts a lot of people to this environment as well. I think it's very important because, I mean, the ocean is a very unique environment and requires, I think, a unique set of skills and a unique appreciation of that environment. So I think if you have engineers and programmers that are disconnected from that environment, it doesn't provide any real benefit. I think it's very important for any work that's being done is that the people that are doing the work have some mariner skills and some mariner experience. And so, this type of application or applied research or applied development, I think is going to be essential for people to know the environment it's going to be working in. So that said, your original question was about jobs of the future and what there is. And to be honest, I don't think I could speculate what the jobs will look like in the future. If you had asked me 5 years ago, the jobs that we're doing now, I couldn't have really given you a great answer, to be honest. I think the idea is that if you remain flexible and open and ready to adapt to the changes that are coming because of artificial intelligence and machine learning, it's going to be a great future.
So, given that, Don, and this will be our wrap-up question, what would you advise a young Don or a young person today who has the same kind of interests in the ocean and being on the ocean, and wants to pursue a career in that direction? What steps would you advise them to take?
I'd say get involved. Get involved with some sort of an ocean initiative. I think, one thing that I've always appreciated about people that worked in the ocean is that we tend to want to be here. Like, we've made proactive decisions to enter into these careers, and we tend to be pretty happy with what we're doing. So if you have an interest, if you feel you have an interest, get involved in this type of work. There's lots of opportunities. It's a wonderful place. It's a wonderful environment to work with, and like I said, people are generally really happy to be here. So there's lots of opportunities, and it has a great potential future for people who want to get into this field.
Don, it's fascinating talking to you. Thank you very, very much. Don Scott, the CTO of Mayflower Autonomous Ship. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Well, from technology on the ocean to the people operating that technology and the people who live in, by, and from the ocean, we're very lucky to be joined by Emma McKinley from Cardiff University, who is a marine social scientist. Hi there, Emma.
Hi, Hal. Thanks for having me.
Lovely to have you. I'd like to start with this idea that we talked about with Don of civilizing the seas and the role that, people play in that. And obviously for most of human history, it's just been people and some tools near, in, and on the ocean. And now we're talking about autonomous machines plying their own way with, people in control centers telling them what to do. Do you think that humanity's relationship with the sea is changing at any particular rate in a way it hasn't in the past today?
Yes, I think humanity's relationship with the ocean has changed over time. You're right that the ocean economy, that relationship with the sea and the ocean and coast is not something that's new. It's something that's been around for generations, and the ocean has been this connector between people, societies, through trade, transport, fishing, all those kind of traditional industries. But what's really happened more recently is that we're actually kind of disconnected from the ocean. There's a lot of people that don't have that relationship. Even those coastal communities, they're quite set aside. It's quite out of sight, out of mind. And so I think there has been a bit of a shift in recent years. I think we are perhaps seeing something of a shift back, maybe towards where we're looking towards the ocean, and there's an increased awareness of the need to think about those societal relationships and that human connection between people, ocean, and space and place, really. So that relationship is kind of in constant flux and changing in space and time. And I think we'll continue to do so as technology and innovation continues to advance through the ocean economy and through ocean science.
Tell me a little bit more about this shift that you're seeing. I mean, it's funny you should say that society at the moment is somewhat disconnected from the ocean. I grew up next to the ocean in Cork in Ireland, and since leaving university have been incredibly disconnected, and I do feel it when I go back. It's a very, very different environment. But what sort of signs are you seeing that there is any sort of reconnection?
So I think, if you look at, there's been lots of studies that have been done recently. Marine social science is a relatively new field of work, and that kind of awareness and recognition of the importance of embedding marine social sciences is fairly recent. And what we've shown is that in different places, in different communities, there will be certain groups that are quite connected, that have high levels of awareness and concern about the ocean and the relationship they have. Some coastal communities, fishing communities, will be really intrinsically linked to those spaces. But society as a whole, it's funny that you mentioned, being disconnected. There are places in the UK, places like Plymouth, where there are kids that have never been to the beach, that have never been to the coast and sea, and that can be down to poor transport links, just not having the interest, not having that sense of the ocean or coast being part of their identity. But I think in the last couple of years, we've seen an increased discussion around climate change, about degradation of natural systems, about the importance of blue space. That's been something that's come out really strongly over the last 9 months as we've been experiencing and living through the impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic, like getting out into nature, being by coast and sea. And so I think we're hopefully at something of a turning point where we're starting to think, okay, there's a real benefit of being around, by, in ocean and coastal spaces. The value of blue space for mental health and well-being is being discussed more and more. The role of the ocean economy as part of the recovery, not just as part of recovery to the COVID-19 situation, but before that, the ocean economy is being kind of seen as this solution for quite a lot of the challenges that we're facing. So I think there is a shift, but for that to be done sustainably, to be done in an equitable and inclusive way, we need to be thinking about those relationships between people and place and ocean. We need to be encouraging and fostering that connection that people haven't maybe always had with that environment, and kind of, I suppose, emphasizing the role that the ocean has in everyday society and everyday life, the importance of it to our lives. And we're starting to see that things like the Blue Planet documentaries a couple of years ago, that resulted in a real shift around marine plastics, for example. And so what we need to try and do is harness that kind of public will, that kind of momentum, and also the industry will to really make changes rapidly and with that kind of urgency that we saw around marine plastics. So yeah, hopefully a bit of a crest of the wave moving forward. Lots that we can still do, I think, to kind of improve things looking to the future.
I remember thinking that I was back home when I knew what the tide was going to be that day, when I knew when high and low tide was, because obviously living in London or Hong Kong or wherever I happen to be that year, I don't have no idea what the tide is doing. But when I'm back in Cork, I do know. That seems like a neat definition. Is there a risk with all this idea that you can sort of basically further civilize the seas through sensing and technology? Is there a risk that either communities or livelihoods are put at risk by that industrialization, that kind of, I think, this is all about the benefits of the blue economy, but I guess I wonder whether you worry about the downsides or the externalities of that, even in a sort of ideally clean and machinated future for the ocean.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, our coastal communities globally are already some of the most vulnerable. They're already places that experience high levels of deprivation in some cases, where they have kind of extreme levels of migration of younger generations out of their areas because they don't have access to job opportunities. So they're already places that are quite vulnerable to change. And if we move in such a way that is completely autonomizing and based in the kind of machine learning kind of world, then we risk losing traditional skills, we risk losing the cultural identity and heritage of some of these coastal spaces. And that's really important, really valuable to the economy, but also really valuable and vital to those communities, their sense of place and who they are as a society. And so I think as we look towards the UN Ocean Decade, as we look towards the next few years and what the ocean economy can mean, I think there's a real opportunity to think about it in a kind of slightly different way. I think historically it's been very focused on this industry perspective, but I think we have an opportunity to think about it in a much more inclusive and holistic way. So how can we work with coastal communities to make sure that we involve them in these decisions, that we involve them in the development of new industries, that we look for the skills gaps and support capacity building and training to support some of the innovation that Don was discussing. So I think there are risks, but I think if we are clever and work this through in a holistic and integrated and kind of cross-sector way of thinking, then there are more opportunities for it to be a much more inclusive and equitable ocean economy, really, without those kind of risks, hopefully, to some of those more traditional industries and traditional communities, perhaps.
Well, you mentioned, Emma, that marine social science is a relatively new field, and I must say it sounds eminently sensible to be studying the dynamics between people and the ocean if there is a dramatic change underway in how humans use it. Tell us a little bit with that in mind about how you got into this sector of academia, and what kinds of steps someone might take if they were interested in the same sorts of things.
So I think, importantly, it's probably necessary to mention that marine social scientists have been around for a while, but I think the recognition of the field and as a kind of suite of disciplines is fairly new, fairly recent, and the value and the role it has in decision making is definitely something that's growing. In my case, I started out as a marine biologist, so I started out in natural sciences. And had a conversation on a Thai island working on a conservation project with a very wealthy couple who asked me why I couldn't just tell people to stop fishing if it was damaging coral reefs. And I was like, well, because they're feeding their families and it's their livelihoods. And it was that conversation very much kind of resulted in a kind of seismic shift, really, in the career I was going down. I had always been, I'm a marine biologist. I love natural sciences. That's what I want to do. But it really struck me that if we want to protect, conserve and manage our oceans, it's actually people and people's behaviour and the policies and institutions and the governance structures that kind of influence all of that we actually need to understand and be able to work alongside and work with. So that was kind of how I moved into that field of work. And there are some courses and some programs that are providing that kind of interdisciplinary marine science education. I think historically, if you were doing marine sciences, it was oceanography, ecology, very environmentally focused. But there's now definitely been a shift towards thinking about heritage, sense of place, culture, the people that make up those communities and those spaces as well. I set up the Marine Social Science Network a couple of years ago to try and bring together that community of researchers and practitioners. So if people are interested, that's a great resource to kind of find out a little bit more and connect with people across the world that are working in that space.
There's this discussion reminds me of the idea that within indigenous communities or even communities of creatures that live in different parts of the planet that we don't yet understand, there is sort of embedded intrinsic knowledge that can be very helpful to solving the kinds of problems that human beings collectively need to solve in order to not burn the planet to a crisp, et cetera, et cetera. Can you give us some examples of the sorts of sort of both jobs and community activities that take place on, near, by the ocean that might have some of this intrinsic knowledge that, you know, ultimately would be much better served being understood by the blue economy than accidentally being destroyed by it?
Wow, I mean, if you take something as simple as fishing, you know, fishing communities, those coastal areas, they've been adapting and responding to change and to changes in their environment. They know where to fish, what seasons, what species are there and how they've changed over time. And that's such valuable local and traditional knowledge. And that's, you know, fishing communities in Cornwall, it's the indigenous communities of Nova Scotia, it's all of those kind of places and people that understand their environment in a very different way. But also it's anybody living within a coastal environment, coastal space that has that connection and understanding of what change means for their community. So if you think about issues around climate change, like increased flooding, coastal erosion, people living in those spaces will know about kind of what that means for their local area and be able to give us as researchers, as policymakers, as decision makers, really valuable insight into understanding what those impacts are and what we need to be taking account of to make sure our decisions are future proofed. And I think it's such valuable information and knowledge that we really can't discount. It's so important for us to kind of not forget that knowledge. And in terms of jobs where people would have that kind of information, I mean, it's a whole range of things. It's people working across maritime sectors and maritime industries, both indirectly and directly. So if you think about the seafood processing industry, that's not one set of jobs, that's a whole value chain that will have different levels and types of knowledge and information that can feed into how we work towards a sustainable seafood kind of future. So I think that kind of local ecological traditional knowledge is something that's really important. So working with communities, working with those people that are part of the ocean economy network, it has to continue and has to be really participatory and inclusive, moving, like, and looking to the future and moving forward. Yeah.
And that's very interesting, given what I want to come on to just to wrap us up here, which is that this webinar is about, you know, innovation in the ocean, and therefore, you know, at least in name, about technology. But what would you suggest that technologists do in order to maybe understand some of these local issues? I mean, it seems to me like maybe there's a little bit of humility in the best possible sense in order, just the idea that all you need to do is gather a bunch of data and build a model and you'll understand everything there is about your problem set. It seems to me like there's quite a lot of perhaps difficult to understand things that are already understood by the communities that work in these sectors. Do you have any recommendations for the techies in the audience?
Speak to people, go to the communities and speak to them. I mean, these things have to be really participatory and inclusive. And I think part of why we've ended up in a situation where some of our management decisions haven't worked, or some of our industries kind of, there's been like a lack of social acceptability of certain developments or certain kind of interventions around newer sectors, is that communities feel alienated from those decisions and not part of that process. And so I think it's really important that you speak to people, and there are loads of groups and organisations across the world that can help facilitate that. So here in the UK, we have coastal partnerships that can help facilitate that kind of interaction between coastal communities, industries, local authorities, etc. So it's speak to people. It's really the crux of it.
Often the best ideas are the most straightforward as well. Emma, we're out of time, but really lovely talking to you. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
Thank you very much, Emma, for that discussion. We are going to move on now and broaden things out a little bit with our panel discussion. And we are very lucky to be joined by some excellent panelists from all over the world. Very grateful to them for dialing in with us today. We have got Simon Bennett, who is the General Manager for Sustainable Development for Swire Pacific Offshore. Hi, Simon. We've also got Lorgen Riise, Human Resources Officer at Mowi, and Sif Rishoej, the Vice President for People, Purpose and Communication at BioMar. Hello to you all, and thank you for joining us. I would like to get things started on this panel, which is about the opportunities available to us in the ocean economy, with a little bit about you all and a little bit about your companies, and just a quick thought on what, as you see it, is the biggest opportunity in the ocean economy in this strange time of pandemic going forward. And to start, let's go to you, Anne, please.
Yeah, so we've had a lot of changes with the pandemic, but we see also a lot of opportunities going on, and currently working on a lot of new technology in aquaculture. And I think one of the largest potential to impact the sustainability of our industry is a new sensing system that we work with and have developed in cooperation with Tidal at Alphabet. This is an advanced underwater sensing that develops intelligence on real-time growth, feeding and lice counting for salmon, using new camera technology and machine learning to track and model fish behaviors, environmental conditions, and the health of fish over time. Very great new advances in a stressful time, I'd say.
That sounds fascinating. Thank you, Anne. Let's come to you next, Sif.
Yeah, from my perspective, there's actually quite a lot of things going on right now, which will be interesting to especially the aquaculture industry. One of the things that are happening is our change of way of working into more remote and more hybrid work means that we are empowering people to a degree which we have not seen before, which also releases a huge potential of innovation. That potential of innovation combined with some of the technological progress that we are making, both as a company, but also, as Anna mentioned, as an industry at the moment, I'm pretty sure that that will take us some quite big step forwards.
Thank you very much. And Simon, last but not least, Swire Pacific Offshore. What is you and yours take on this question?
Thanks. It's quite a long. Probably a long answer, probably a too long answer. I work for two different companies. I work for Swire Pacific Offshore, which provides marine support services to the offshore oil and gas industry, and also for China Navigation, which is a standard deep sea shipping company with liner shipping and containers. On the offshore side, or the offshore oil and gas side, there is obviously a strong move towards renewables globally, but there's still 20 or 30 years left in a serious need for oil and gas products, for fossil fuels. They have to be used in a more environmentally sensitive way. Carbon capture and storage will help, but it's not just providing motive power for transport and for power generation. It's also producing other byproducts, plastics, fertilizers, chemicals, etc. So there's at least another 30 years left in that industry, but it will decline over time. The deep sea shipping industry has been dramatically affected by COVID. All the companies which had just-in-time supply chains have found them to be not robust at all, quite brittle in some cases. And I think once we get back up and running again, sometime after the middle of 2021, I think many large companies with reliance on long supply chains will look at them, and maybe there'll be some re-onshoring.
Thanks for that, Simon. I come right back to you on that, actually, because funnily enough, the piece that I have in this week's paper is about decommissioning oil rigs in the North Sea, and how the Shetlands is sort of thinking of that, not exactly as a replacement for the oil and gas boom that they've enjoyed for a long time, but at least to sort of help take up the slack. Is that a global story? Is there, because I mean, I know we've sort of got a confluence of factors, right? Low oil prices, old infrastructure. How much, is decommissioning a booming industry all over the world, or are there regional nuances?
It's certainly been picking up. You can go back to Ekofisk when that was taken apart, and that was 10 or 15 years ago. It depends where you are in the world. Some nations, when they gave out the licenses, they included a requirement that at the end of the platform's economic life, the oil major who's running it has to dismantle it, demolish it, take it away, either completely down to the seabed or to a certain level. There are many other jurisdictions around the world which will have that legislation, and there are many which won't. So there's no simple answer to that. But certainly many of them should be removed when we reach the end of oil and gas, 40 years time maybe.
Yeah. And I mean, this panel it is not just about innovation. It's about how individuals can take advantage of the opportunities in the ocean. And one of the things I thought when you were describing what Mowi's doing, and you're talking about sensors and algorithms, Anne, is how do you see people's involvement in this world when if the efficiencies are going to come from cameras underwater and machine learning algorithms, which all sound fascinating, and I've written about before, in fact. Does that mean, how will it work in terms of how many people are needed to do this kind of work as aquaculture scales more and more to provide more and more protein?
Well, we definitely need a lot of people working for us also in the years to come, and we're an industry in growth, so we really hope to grow, and it will mean having a lot of people working for us still. But of course, we all know that with the technology changes that is going on at the moment, it will change what we are looking for and who we need. But I think the most important thing for us is to tell everybody that we are very dependent on attracting talent to the business and talking about opportunities and creating a correct and compelling picture of the business. And to us, the challenge today is to stand out in the crowd. And we are looking for people today with an interest and passion for producing sustainable food, for making a difference in the world, and who can adapt to fast-paced change, which we are right in the middle of, and that will continue. So we are more concerned about attracting people with the right values that can complement our company than the perfect match for skills that are changing so fast. But that being said, with the technology change in the world and in our industry, we see an increasing demand for people with technical skills. And the skills needed are getting more and more generic between the businesses. So in the end, we will fight for the same people, I think.
Sif, let me come to you to broaden that question out a little bit. Do you at BioMar see any tension between increasing automation in the ocean economy and the opportunities for people to be employed in the sector? How do you think about that issue? Is it a non-issue? Are there some areas where people will lose out and other areas where there will be more and more employment? What do you think?
I think there in general will be more and more employment, but I think it will be different skills that we are looking for. And now there's a big change happening where we, of course, have a huge responsibility as employer to try to upskill our staff the most possible and try to figure out how is it that we can use those people in the best possible way to benefit both the industry, but also benefit the development of the people. And I believe that what we see now is that we see a change, because before maybe we were more looking for people with technical skills. And now we see that we are looking for a hybrid of competences, both within the technical, the digital, and the more soft skills related to collaboration and cross-functional development.
Staying with you for a minute, Sif, you and Anne's companies, I don't know if you supply each other, but your industry, your sectors are certainly directly overlapping. Do you have the same kinds of transformation in terms of new sensors, new algorithms to do with the production side of things in your industry?
Definitely. There's a lot of technological changes happening at the moment, both in terms of connectivity, data, analytics, AI as well. So we see a lot of changes happening also in the way we are connected across the world, benefiting from our global footprint as well.
Gotcha. And Simon, the same kind of question to you, really, which is the balance of skills and how that's changing in terms of what Swire is looking for. Swire is a very old company, right? Been around a very long time. I have been based in Hong Kong for us recently, and Swire is, in all the buildings, a household name there. How is what Swire is looking for within the areas that you're in charge of changing?
If I can answer that, not so much from the Swire point of view, but for the whole, I don't speak on behalf of the entire shipping sector, but my personal view is that the entire shipping sector is heading for a paradigm shift as we move towards maritime autonomous surface ships. I think that's going to come, and I think that's going to come quickly. I think often people underestimate the rate of pace of change, but I look around at the moment and I see there are probably little more than teenagers sitting in a bunker in one country, flying a drone, and it's injuring people and destroying buildings half a world away. If you can do that at the moment, you can certainly move a ship at 15 miles an hour across an ocean which is pretty open. The constraint to that, the bottleneck, will be regulatory, whether ports at each end want autonomous surface ships moving around inside their ports with nobody on board. But they're being tested at the moment, and they can come and they will come very quickly. We will need people to drive them, but the people we will need will not be the guys that we have at the moment who can tie a bowline and who can service a turbocharger. They'll be the people who understand systems, electronics, electrics, and that sort of thing. So, and then you'll need to service the ships when they get to each end. So we will still need a large number of people, but they will not have the skill sets that we have at the moment. That's my personal belief. And as a corollary to that, I believe it would not be responsible to continue to dangle the carrot of a career to young seafarers coming into the industry at the moment, because that career may not be there. That the current careers may not be there. There will be a career, but they will need different skill sets, and we will need them globally.
I think that's a very well put thought, Simon. It reminds me of one of the concepts that I have been fascinated on when reporting on oceans and ocean technology in the past, which is Cousteau's idea of civilizing the sea, that civilization on land is all about farming and human involvement with the land. And in a way, it sounds like what all three of you are saying is that there'll be more human involvement with the oceans in future, but there might be less humans on the actual ocean. Is that fair, Anne? It sort of sounds to me like you're expecting to have more humans, in warehouses or in land-based factories or writing algorithms to analyze data. What do you think about that?
No, I have to agree to that. I think with, just the sensor example, we know that we can do this by machine learning instead of having people being physically doing tests of water quality and so on. And also, in the last year, with the digital revolution we've seen for the employees and working on digital platforms, we have shown that remote work can make it possible also to live outside of urban centers, not having to commute or move with the family for a job or actually be on site to do a job, but also to be able to collaborate across countries and having new network and better cross-organizational involvement. We definitely seen a start of something that will just grow, I think.
Siv, what do you think? I saw a little smile dance across your face when I was talking about the rather quaint civilizing the seas thing. Agree, disagree?
Yeah, definitely agree with Anna. We see the same picture. Lots of things are happening, and in the terms of looking at less people at the sea, a great example is, for example, what has changed during the last year is delivering feed at sea to farms is being done without any people receiving the actual feed on the farms. That can be done quite automated now. So we're already taking a lot of staff out of that equation. But there will, as we are growing, of course, be a need for staff in other types of positions. We also see a different use of technology. For example, what we have seen here during this period of COVID is that we have had people helping us commissioning factories on the other side of the planet by use of smart glasses, by use of technology, data. They have actually been able to support teams in ways which we have not thought was going to be possible before this crisis.
I have a specific question about the delivery of feed without any human involvement. I imagine the difficult thing about that is the billing and the being able to say this is how much was. It's a trust question, right? Like how much feed, when, and for how long. Is that am I right on that? And if so, how do you solve that?
Not to go too much into the logistics services, is not my area of expertise, but of course that is delivered exactly what is agreed with the customer. So we have intelligent systems controlling that as well, and that is of course also being received by the customer. So it's not so much a question of trust. It is actually being controlled by systems, both on our side, but definitely also on the customer side as well.
Do you think, Simon, that this slightly different civilized seas that is more about, it's less about having actual humans with their eyes and ears and hands on the ocean and more about having sensors that are connected to humans on the ocean? Do you think that is a cultural shift that is difficult for the existing kind of, I don't know, ocean community, the kind of people who go to university and study, I don't know what the course would be, global logistics or something. Does that break with their expectations of the kind of life that they wanted to lead? Because from what it sounds to me, it's like if you wanted to lead a life roaming around the ocean on a container ship, sounds quite cool, but that might not be in the future so much for young people today. How does that... Is that right? And if so, how are people dealing with that change of expectations about the kinds of work that the ocean provides?
there's sort of two answers to that. I think if you want to go roam around the ocean, you want to buy yourself a yacht and do it that way. It's pretty dull doing long hauls on a container ship or a tanker on the trunk routes. But the whole point of trust and inspection and doing things from ashore, we're already started doing that. We rely on class societies to do inspections, so they're independent and competent, and they do inspections on all the various ship parts on behalf of the flag states and on behalf of the owners. They are now doing that remotely as a direct result of COVID. They've had to do that because ships have to be inspected, otherwise you lose your insurance. They're doing it with drones, so that is already happening, as I say, and that is a direct result of COVID.
Right. And do you see, I don't know, culturally at MOA that there are at Mowi, sorry, that there are people who have the potential to be a bit left behind by this transformation, people who have had one career their whole lives, or certain expectations that are not, no longer the way that things are going?
Well, we know that things are going to change quite drastically, and we try to monitor closely, not just the development of our industry, but also society, to predict the future needs for competency and skills, and then adjust and align our organization and learning efforts internally. And as I mentioned, the fight for talent is real, and we need to take great responsibility in-house for keeping people already with us and develop them. And then to develop the people with the mindset and approach to change, and to build a strong learning culture is going to be very important. And I believe learning on the job will be the most important thing that we do to reskill and upskill the people already working for Mowi. So changes ahead, definitely, but I think we have really good people, smart people working for us, and we just need to prepare for the future.
I think a lot of this discussion is naturally thinking about, young people coming into the industry. But are there areas where, for instance, you all are looking to sort of poach cross-sector? I mean, the largest pool of talent for people that write software and deal with networks of sensors is going to be Silicon Valley. Is that maybe even a challenge? Because I imagine that the economics of labor are different in the ocean economy versus Silicon Valley. How does that challenge play out for you, Sif?
What we see now is that we are, of course, looking for talents even beyond the aquaculture sector. We are looking for talents in lots of different areas to make sure that we can actually get the people in to the company with the right competences. Whether that means that we need to fish in the same pond as a lot of other types of companies, that's what we need to do. We need to compete, but that also, referring back to what Anna said earlier, we need to make sure that the aquaculture industry and blue economy has a very strong brand and a strong story, so people can actually tap into what it is that we are striving to do, so that they understand our purpose and our mission in this world. Because if we are going to compete for the same talent with many other industry, it needs to be clear for people why we are here and why they should join us.
Got it. Simon, what about for Swire? Because I know I've met many sort of young Swire graduate trainees in my time in Hong Kong and in China, actually. Is the way that Swire thinks about attracting people changing?
At a general management level, it's slowly evolving, yes. But that's not really my area. I'm not competent to talk about that. But if you look at the marine industry, it's probably 150 years ago, we had a lot of sailors at sea who were very good at setting sails. And then you move on 30, 40 years, and we've got a lot of guys shoveling coal into a boiler. And that wasn't much fun. So we move on from there, and then we've got oil-powered ships. So we have changed significantly over the years, and we will continue to change, and we will handle that. We will match the skill sets we need with the way the industry is moving. But I do think the industry is about to move into a very fast changing era. But I'm sure we'll cope with it.
That brings me on quite nicely to one of our viewer questions, which is about education and effectively whether the panel thinks that there are sufficient educational resources about the ocean economy out there at present. I guess my own slight spin on that is I'd be interested to know what things are out there right now that anyone who is interested could go and check out that you are all aware of. And also, what more you think could be done. Let's come to you for that, Anne.
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, to be able to succeed with that, we need to have a close cooperation with academic institutions, with governments. And the government part is very important because they have to support us in creating, the correct and positive perception of the industry, to give academic institutions the incentive to provide programs for the ocean economy. And once we have that, I think we are in a position to move on. And today we have established really good relationships with several academic institutions offering university credits to our employees on bachelor's levels. We've cooperated with business schools for the seafood MBA here in Norway. And we offer apprenticeships on all sea sites and processing sites. So we do a lot already. However, we're dependent on this good, solid cooperation to make this happen also in the future.
Sif, you're in a sort of similar sector. I imagine some of your points would be similar to Anne's. But do you have anything to add on this?
Yeah, I think some of the things that we have seen in Norway the last years in terms of cooperation between the industry, the government, the educational institutions is something made possible because we have a huge hub of aquaculture in Norway. And we need to get the same mindset broadened more into the rest of the world, into the EU, but also across the different regions where we have aquaculture. Because it's going to be increasingly important that we're reaching a very high level of competences within the industry, because the challenge ahead of the industry is so complex that it's not going to be solved with simple means.
Got it. We've talked about autonomous shipping and sensors in general, but I'm curious to know what kind of sectors the panel thinks are maybe unexpected things, ocean economy activities that one might not have thought of that you all see or expect to see happening over the next, say, 5 to 10 years. And I don't know, maybe some of those are sort of pandemic related, maybe they're not, maybe they're something you've had an eye on for a while. Is there anything, Simon, that you are seeing that is a surprising use of autonomous ships, perhaps, or something that is opened up by that one might not expect?
On autonomous ships in particular, no. But there is something heading our way called marine spatial planning, where the oceans are going to be divided up quite clearly between oil and gas exploration, diving, aquaculture, tourism, fishing, etc., to keep the various activities apart from each other, and they will all require their own infrastructure to support them. So the oceans are moving towards a period of quite fast change. Just to go back to your previous question, I just made a note whilst the other two panelists were talking. We're currently talking to the University of the South Pacific, the Copenhagen Business School, the Maritime Energy and Sustainable Development Department at NTU here in Singapore, University in Christchurch, and UMass at University College London. And that's just in my tiny little department in a relatively small shipping company, and we've got contacts in all those areas, looking at trying to gauge what the future is going to be and trying to be ready for it. So there's a lot of academic work being done out there linked to the shipping operation and not the wider aquaculture areas of the other two panelists. So I think it's a very fertile ground at the moment.
I want to pick up on the idea of sort of zoning the ocean that seems that you're discussing here, and tie that into one of the other questions we've had from the audience, which is a general question about what the role for regulators is in sort of stimulating the ocean economy. That sounds like something that, you know, is definitely going to be of interest to regulators in all countries all over the world. I'm sitting here in London hearing on the news every day about the sovereignty of British waters, etc., etc. How important, or where do the regulators come in, or what does the framework look like? This might get a little too specific, but what is the role of the regulators in divvying up the oceans like you're talking about, Simon? And then let's come to Sif and Anne for extra on that.
The regulator is UNCLOS, United Nations Conference of Law of the Sea, which is, it's all acronyms, moving to producing a convention beyond national jurisdictions, so pushing out your 12-mile limit, 200-mile limit even further. And that will be very important if seabed mining takes off, as to who owns the vast oceanic floors in the Pacific, for example. So UNCLOS should be the regulator for that. Most countries have signed up to that, and there are currently disputes on maritime jurisdiction going to UNCLOS and being sorted out there. It needs all the countries in the world to sign up to it. There are some notable ones who haven't, but that is the natural regulator for that.
Okay. And Anne, it seems to me that this sort of more strict zoning and perhaps enforcement of those zones would be a good thing for aquaculture. Are you in discussion with? Do you know whether you were in discussion with regulators about how this might work?
So we are very much in favor of strict, predictable regulations. To create, the serious frame and basis for this industry for a very good reason. Aquaculture is a very sustainable way to produce food. And as we all know, we have to produce more sustainable food in the future and in the sea. So to be able to move that forward, this is the base that we need. And I'd like to talk a little bit more about sustainability, if I may. We are the most energy and resource efficient way to produce proteins. It is a climate friendly food production, and we need stable food systems for the future. So this is something we have to very much have to do with governments and with the international community. And I like to see that young people who take an interest in sustainability and food production, new technology, and would like to take part in changing the future of food production, they should look nowhere else than aquaculture.
Sif, to you with the same question on regulatory involvement. I guess, you're producing the feed, and so you're less directly connected to, the divvying up of the ocean for different things. But has there been perhaps increased regulatory scrutiny on the feed itself and how that is produced?
You can say what we as a company is very much appreciating is working together with the authorities as well, making sure that we have strong regulations, and also that we are putting up the bar for even more sustainable food production, as Anne is mentioning as well. For us, it's important that we are actually setting the bar high, that we are all aiming to try to continuously improve the sustainability of the industry. And for us, the feed is playing quite an important role there. You could say it's the feed is having, you could say, an impact on the final product. And we need to make sure that both raw materials and the way feed is being produced is done in the most sustainable way. So for us, it's very important, the work that we are both doing with industry standards, but also the work that we are doing together with governments and other regulatory institutions in order to make sure that we are setting the bar high for the industry.
Let's stay on the feed and the sustainability, because I wanted to come back to both you and Anne with a version of Simon's question on unexpected changes that are coming out of the ocean economy, things to keep an eye on for viewers. But one of the things I remember from reporting on feed some time ago now is that it's quite a difficult challenge to get the right balances of fats in the feed without taking necessarily like loads of fish out of the ocean to just turn into feed anyway. What's the kind of technological status of replacing some of those things? I mean, I think when I was reporting on it, there was an idea of genetically modifying algae in order to produce the right levels of omega-3s or something for feed. How does BioMar deal with that? And what's the current sort of cutting edge on the sustainable production of feed?
You can say we have a whole team of R&D people looking into innovations within our feed. And some of them are specifically specialized in looking into new raw materials to make sure that we can actually produce more sustainable feed for the future. And there's a lot of technological and innovative things happening at the moment. Algae is, of course, one of them, but there's a lot more single-cell proteins, a lot of other technologies coming up now, which are quite interesting and which will definitely also drive the sustainability profile of the feed in the future.
And I think we should stick on sustainability for one more question, and I'll come back to you, Anne, given your, both extreme relevance and expressed interest. I remember a couple of years ago, there was this idea that one could start farming fish in much more of the open ocean using these big structures. And there was a structure, I think, made in a Chinese shipyard and sailed all the way around the world off the coast to the coast of Norway. And the idea being that essentially there is a space problem with inland waters for raising fish. So my question is really, is there a sustainability issue in terms of space for aquaculture? And to what extent does open ocean fish farming help with that?
Well, I can say that the space issue is not really there. 70% of this planet is the ocean, right? So this is where we have the space to do aquaculture. Of course, the density can be higher in the most, popular areas, but I think with good cooperation between companies and government, this is not really an issue. And there is a lot of development going on, I think, with all the aquaculture companies to try out new technologies, to automate, use AI, sensoring and big data to make bigger farms, fewer farms, a lot of different initiatives, the business and open up new opportunities in the future, for sure.
And Simon, I'll come back to you with sustainability as well. How does Swire think about this? Are there specific programs you're doing to try and change the way you do business in the ocean? I mean, shipping is a difficult business to make sustainable, but what sort of progress are you guys making?
Sustainability is a core value for the entire group, whether it's bottling, Coke, or airlines or shipping. And that's my day job, 7 days a week. We don't have time here to go through all the programs that we're looking at, but the biggest issue for us at the moment is decarbonization. And we are working with the universities that I mentioned earlier to see, and other shipping companies, to see if we can get a handle on the best fuel to go forward, which will stop emitting greenhouse gases. We have a small project on the go in the Pacific for a low-tech, low-carbon, low-cost inter-island vessel, which will also help to re-energize the outlying communities There are many, many tiny islands with no infrastructure, which are depopulating in the same way as some islands in Scotland are. And the idea is if we can show that there's a regular route going there, we can take a cash crop from them and we can deliver food, pharmaceuticals, water to them and maybe stop the depopulation whilst at the same time reducing the fossil fuel import bills for the countries in the South Pacific, which for some of them is 30% of their GDP. It's very, very high. There are very many other projects on the go. So at the end of this, if you want to book another hour or so, I can tell you all about them.
Well, it's always one of the upsides of doing these panels is that I always learn a lot that I want to follow up afterwards. We've got just a couple of minutes left, and I thought it might be an idea to end just with a couple of sentences from each of you on, hopefully we're going to see less, an easing pandemic next year versus a heightened and urgent and getting worse pandemic this year in 2020. How do you expect in your worlds things to change as vaccines roll out? Fingers crossed, obviously. What sort of changes do you expect in a couple of sentences? We'll come right back to you to start on that one, Simon.
The huge issue for the entire shipping sector at the moment is seafarers stuck on ships over their contract length. There are many different nationalities, and there are so many moving parts to getting a mixed nationality crew out to the ship, having gone through quarantine before they leave their home port, quarantine in the crew change port, then getting the crew off. They go through quarantine, then they've got to get flights. There are 400,000 seafarers at the moment who've done over their time 9 months, 11, 10 months, 12 months. Some have done 17 months, and they're unable to get home to their families. So that has been a nightmare for us, and it's not good for the mental health of the seafarers, and it will lead to accidents. The Secretary General of the UN has commented on it. We need seafarers to be classed as essential workers in the same way as some airline crews are, because we are moving 90% of the world trade around. We didn't stop doing that. Everything is still moving around, and the seafarers are doing it for you, and they can't get home.
That sounds like a very urgent one, and definitely one that one hopes will ease as soon as possible. Sif, what about for you? What changes will you see easing out over through the coming year?
I hope that one simple thing, of course, for us as a global company is to start collaborating more, traveling more between the different countries. I don't think we will ever see the same level of travel as we have seen before. Definitely not. We have experienced new way of collaborating, which are actually bringing maybe even better and faster and more agile results. But we are missing being together as a global company, feeling that face-to-face contact, innovating together, discussing where is it that we are going, both as an industry, but also, of course, internally in our company. So we are really hoping for that to ease during the next half year, both with the vaccines, but also in general, opening up for collaboration.
I think a feeling reflected across a lot of industries for sure. Mm-hmm. Anne, the last word on this falls to you. How do you and Mowi see what's going to shift in the next year? One hopes.
Yeah. So first of all, I have to agree with the travel comment from Sif. I think we will see less travel. And this is good in the way that it also opens up opportunities for a larger group of people to work for companies that are not so mobile. So that's a good part. We definitely look forward to getting people back in the office and open back up, the social community that a workplace really is. And then lastly, we hope the restrictions will ease soon so people can go out, go to restaurants and enjoy the fantastic product that we offer. this is what we probably look most forward to in the company, again, for the society to open up as a whole.
Gotcha. Well, look, we have hit our time. I've really enjoyed our conversation. We've learned an awful lot about a wide array of things. I think, if anything, we've learned how many different sectors the ocean economy touches. We've got everything from the chemistry of feed to contracting issues with seafaring labour to machine learning. So it's been a very diverse 40 minutes. All that remains to do is to thank you, Simon, Siv, and Anne, very, very much for joining us and for sharing your thoughts with us. It's been fascinating. Thank you very much. Great. Well, Kendra, we've just heard a wide-ranging panel covering everything from machine learning to labour law on the seas. Delighted to have you with us. Kendra MacDonald is the Chief Executive Officer of Canada's Ocean Supercluster, and we're going to dive in and analyse some of the points we've just heard from our panellists. Kendra, to get us started, please just tell us, what is Canada's Ocean Supercluster?
Sure. So first of all, it's a pleasure to be here. So Canada's Ocean Supercluster is actually one of 5 superclusters in Canada. It was established a couple of years ago really to change Canada's innovation reputation and the way that we invest in innovation. The Ocean Supercluster specifically is focused on growing the ocean economy and really trying to change the way ocean business is done. And what we mean by that, a lot of focus on cross-sectoral collaboration. So it was an interesting discussion listening to how more generic skills are going to move across the different ocean sectors, because we very much see that. And that's something that our companies are focused on, but also increasingly digital, increasingly sustainable, and increasingly inclusive. So that's really how we're changing the way things are being done.
Tell us a bit about, Canada's got a lot of coastline. I don't know if it's the longest coastline in the world, but it's got to be up there. Tell us a bit about which of the topics that we discussed in the panel are most relevant for Canada, or even most relevant for your own particular supercluster.
Sure. So Canada has the longest coastline in the world, actually. We are the 4th largest ocean territory. Yeah, we've got 3 oceans that we touch on, obviously, Arctic, Pacific, and Atlantic. And I think a lot of what I heard today really resonates with what we're working towards. So there was big discussion on sustainable. And so we're seeing an increase. The entire conversation around how do we balance health and wealth of the oceans. How does, protection, production, and prosperity all work together if you look at the high-level panel on sustainability? So that's a big one. Digital, right? I think even for me coming into this role with more of a technology background, I think ocean science, and more it's ocean technology, bringing all of those digital solutions that we heard in terms of machine learning and augmented reality and all of those different technologies to the ocean. Innovative in terms of how do we increase innovation, and that's really what our supercluster is designed to do. We co-invest with industry to encourage making bold moves and investing in innovation. And I think one of the other ones that really resonated was just the social license discussion, very specifically to aquaculture. So aquaculture, I think it's misunderstood in terms of the sustainable protein solution that it provides. So how do we increase awareness so that we can attract more of the workforce into aquaculture and help Canadians understand the potential that aquaculture represents?
I think a lot of the discussion does hinge around, jobs and new kinds of jobs that touch on the ocean economy. To what extent does the supercluster sort of focus on creating jobs as a policy objective? Is that important for you?
Yes. So the short answer is yes. Our 2 big measures of success from a supercluster perspective are GDP growth and jobs. So when we look at our various projects, we actually look at job contribution, but we also look at, I think, more broadly workforce development. So I think, and there was lots of discussion in the panel around, you're digitizing, you're automating, you need less workforce, but you also need a workforce with different skills. And from a Canadian perspective, we're an aging workforce, and one of the things that our ocean sectors are facing is actually a loss of workforce, right? So, what does a fish processing look like in the future? How do you attract a different set of skills? How do you keep productive? And so that's a balance in terms of how do we change the workforce versus just sort of increase headcount. The other piece of what we do, though, is very much focused on an inclusive workforce. So we focus on growing our ecosystem and how do we actually attract a workforce into ocean, right? So that's a combination of things. We just launched our Indigenous Career Pivot pilot. Our Indigenous population is one of the fastest growing working age populations. So how do we attract them to jobs in the ocean economy? How do we deal with the gender gap? There's a real shortage of women, for example, that are in ocean sectors. Then you combine women in technology sectors, and then you think about ocean technology. We're just sort of multiplying on each other the challenge that we're facing. So we just launched our Ocean Allies project, which is actually set to measure our current workforce and then be able to develop initiatives from there to be able to change the face of that workforce going forward.
I mean, it does seem to me that these issues intersect with each other, in as much as if the ocean economy requires all these different kinds of workers to do whatever it is, whether it's machine learning or chemistry for fish feed or what have you, that changing the kind of almost the image, I guess, of the kind of person who works in or on or around the ocean is probably quite important, right? Because certainly in my mind, the image is, a sort of grizzled, gruff white guy, probably. Can you tell us a little bit more about the extent to which that intersection is there? And, I guess diversity obviously being important for diversity's sake, but also as a way of getting new skills into a sector that, maybe people have a certain vision in their head of what it's like.
Yeah, so if we think about ocean and the challenges that we're facing, it's incredibly complex, right? And the ocean is under pressure, and you think about the tide of the ocean, the climate change and breathing and everything that is happening. And so what we've seen from research is the more complicated the problem, the more diverse the team you bring to that problem, the better the solution. And so I think it's incredibly important that we bring as many minds as possible to the challenges that are facing our ocean. I think, too, helping people understand a lot of if you look forward, so think about data and think about reducing cost and risk of being on the ocean. Well, that is leveraging more autonomous technology. That's leveraging more sensor technology. That's leveraging more AI and machine learning and data analysis. And so just helping people understand. And for Canada, I'm not sure how familiar you are with the geography of Canada, but the bulk of our population actually sits in the center of the country. And so we have a much less population that's on the coast. They're not looking at the ocean every day. So helping to make that connection for Canadians, helping them to understand that we have the longest coastline in the world, and then really attracting a lot of our tech companies, because Canada has a lot of tech strength, helping them understanding the tremendous opportunity that exists in ocean and how those technology solutions can play out in an ocean environment. And I think that starts to change the face of our workforce.
Well, I know, for instance, that Toronto is one of Google's main offices and has a very strong machine learning community, both academically and in terms of startups. I believe, Kendra, you're in St. John's, aren't you?
I am, yes.
You are, right. And so can you tell us a little bit about just a very local picture of what kind of developments are going on in Newfoundland, and maybe even mention a couple of the new companies or accelerators that you have there that are doing interesting stuff?
Yeah, so our focus, so Supercluster, obviously we're Canada's Ocean Supercluster. We're based in Atlantic Canada. So I am based in St. John's. I actually grew up in Ontario. My mother's from Nova Scotia, so I call myself a Canadian. And so we see, for example, our startup project actually is all of our provinces working together. So that's Genesis Center, which is here in Newfoundland as our incubator. It's NBIF, which is New Brunswick Investment Fund. It includes PEI, BioAlliance, as well as InnovaCorp, Creative Destruction Lab, and Springboard Atlantic. And so that group together is really working to foster startups. That actually, the project has three pieces to that. One was an international competition that actually attracted 158 startups around the world with potential ocean solutions, which has led to 14 finalists. There's a lab to market piece, which is focused on researchers, and that was actually run out of Memorial University. And just helping, one of our challenges in Canada is commercializing research. So how do we help researchers understand entrepreneurial opportunities and what it means to run a business, as well as our Creative Destruction Lab, Atlantic, which has its first ocean cohort and has attracted, I think, about 3/4 of the companies are internationally. But as well as that, we have obviously offshore oil and gas, a big part of Newfoundland and Labrador. So we have lots of different technology companies here in terms of focused on various solutions, and then looking at, increasingly, and we've seen this around the world, how do you take those solutions and take them to aquaculture? How do you take them to offshore wind, for example, as well as to things like Arctic security? So I can keep going. I'm pretty excited about everything that's happening, but there's a few things.
I'm sure there is aquaculture in Canada. I mean, of course there is, but in my head, at least, the aquaculture sort of centers of the world are the Nordics and China. Where are the aquaculture hotspots in Canada?
Yeah, so West Coast and East Coast. So we have quite a bit of activity, and we actually have, Norwegian companies that are here as well. So quite a bit of activity on the West Coast, and then on the East Coast as well. I certainly know Newfoundland and Nova Scotia, and we're seeing increases in that activity.
Gotcha. And during the panel, a lot of what we're discussing is kind of opportunities and areas where the panelists were expecting things to, expecting growth and things to heat up. What are some of the Canada-specific areas that you at the Supercluster are looking at and excited about?
Yeah, so a lot of the products that we've announced, I think, we're on our 16th announcement is coming next week, but in the last month or so, we've probably announced 12 of those. So they're in some pretty exciting areas in terms of a lot of digital solutions. So whether it's, marine search and rescue, marine simulation, in terms of, we've got an engineering solution that really sort of digitizes design, which now, especially with the impacts of the pandemic, we heard a lot in the panel around how do you work remotely. So getting better tools for engineers to be able to work together in more of a virtual environment versus kind of paper designs. So that's another one. We've got autonomous vehicles, so the Ocean project, more and more with respect to reducing GHG emissions. So smart protective coatings is focused on vessel coatings, be able to reduce leaching in the water, reduce drag, therefore fuel consumption, and reducing GHG emissions. And then we're seeing lots in the digital twin space. So again, lots of just collecting the data and then being able to use different technologies to analyze that data and move into things like, predictive maintenance, being able to do remote, again, analysis and troubleshooting and all the things that come with that.
It reminds me a little bit of Canada has this global strength in mining. Whenever you look into mining, you realize that so many mining companies are Canadian. And my understanding for the reason for that is because Canada has a huge amount of natural resources and a huge amount of land with lots of stuff in it. And it just made sense to build companies that could get that out. Do you think that the dynamic is the same with the ocean economy, just that there's this big opportunity not just to grow the economy in terms of Canada's own waters, but to build companies that are kind of more global companies?
Yeah, so I think absolutely. Obviously, we have a natural geographic advantage in terms of being surrounded by water and the length of our coastline. I think that, as we look to, and we heard a lot about this, the remote technologies and the remote monitoring, well, that means that monitoring can be done anywhere in the world. And so Canada can really play a key role in developing those technologies, not only to be able to monitor its own marine environment, but to really play a key role in supporting decision-making all around the world. And I think that's an incredible opportunity to build on Canada's both geographical strength, but also technology strength.
Well, Kendra, I have to admit, I do love the idea of a kind of high-tech oceanographic Canadian superstate, but perhaps sci-fi for the moment, but maybe not forever. Look, that is all we have time for this discussion. But thank you so much for joining us, Kendra, and for tuning in to the panel earlier. I've learned an awful lot, and might make my next visit to St. John's sooner than I had planned otherwise. But thank you very much for joining us.
Awesome. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, thank you again to Kendra MacDonald for joining us to wrap up here today. And thanks in particular to the audience for giving us some of your valuable attention and tuning in this afternoon, London time. Particularly like to thank our great speakers for their insights from all over the world, industries touching on so many different aspects of the ocean economy. I know I've learned a lot today, and I hope that the audience has too. I'd also like to thank Canada's Ocean Supercluster and the province of Nova Scotia in Canada, and the Creative Destruction Lab for their support in helping us make today's discussion possible. And if you'd like to share the discussion with any of your colleagues or peers or friends, you can do so. We'll be uploading a recording of it to our site very soon. And indeed, the Economist events team continues to put on events on all different kinds of subjects, from climate change to manufacturing to coronavirus itself. And all of those events at the moment are online, and you can check them out anytime at events.economist.com. But until the next one, thank you very much for tuning in.